From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here. On a Tuesday, we've got a good show on tap for you. Politics, of course, has been a big theme of our show over the past several weeks, and it's going to be up until the general election. And so much happening on the national stage, especially with some of the changes and the things. It's never boring following Donald Trump now, is it? As there are more and more things happening. And today, we thought we would kind of focus in on some of what's happening in the Trump campaign. And certainly we'll pay attention as well as some of the new developments with regard to Hillary Clinton. But this morning we want to get into that, and I know many of you have strong feelings on it. You're invited to join in the conversation. As always, you see the number up on the screen, 737-7587, as we talk presidential politics, perhaps with a focus on the Republican side of things. And with us this morning to talk about it, we have two great guests. We have Professor Thomas Schwartz from over at Vanderbilt. Good to see you again, sir. We've been spending a lot of time together. And next to him, Steve Gill, well-known conservative political commentator and very involved in politics here in the state, going way back, you and I. It's good to see you again, my friend. It's nice to have you on. Remember, you and I sit here, and Larry Britton would be here with us, by golly. Well, Steve, listen, I know you're very involved. You were at the Republican convention, were you not? And just to start things off with our viewers, from our perspective on our show, give me your take right now on Donald Trump and what you've seen in your mind from the convention to this point, and the way he kind of changes as you see him performing. What do you think?
I've talked with a lot of friends that the key of this election, it seems to me, is if it's about Hillary Clinton, she loses. Okay. If it's about Donald Trump, he loses. I think Hillary Clinton gets that, and she wants it to be about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a massive ego, and he wants it to be about Donald Trump. Right. And I think you've seen really in the last week that his team has finally convinced him that if it's a little bit more about Hillary Clinton, you do still have a chance to win this. And he's had a tough 3 weeks. Last week was a good week, but the last week of the convention, the Democrat convention, the week after, were all pretty bad weeks politically, and it looks like he's getting his footing. And again, if they can turn the attention back to this election being about Hillary Clinton, I think he can still win.
Okay, your example is right on the money this week. He was supposed to later this week, have a speech talking about his immigration policy. That's been couched. I don't know, we'll talk more about whether or not he's recalibrating that to focus maybe more on these new revelations with Hillary's emails. Another 15,000 come up. Maybe focus on her, you think?
And again, you've got a situation where she's claimed she's released everything went out, she sent nothing classified, and yet we're being told by some of those that are reviewing these emails, we're being told by congressional investigators, they don't have the security classification to review the previously released emails. Well, if they weren't classified, why can't they look at them? And why are the Democrats concerned that there may be leaks from these emails if there's nothing classified in the email? So again, the tortured arguments, the inconsistent arguments, all bring it back to her track record of whether she is consistent, whether she is honest, and I think, again, that puts Trump back on better footing. The other thing I would just add, kind of looking at some of the numbers, this is not a 50-state race. We were talking a few moments ago that the state of Tennessee really isn't going to matter a lot in the presidential race because of electoral politics. There's 7 to 9 states that will really matter, places like Colorado, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, all the places you see Hillary Clinton
That's where they're all spending a lot of time.
Going.
That's right.
It's really even down to 40 counties, not even those 7 to 9 states. There are counties within those states that are swing. In Ohio, Cincinnati matters a lot. Akron doesn't matter as much. So when you look at the swing counties, you look at the battleground counties, you're going to see actually where they put their resources in particular counties. And right now, Donald Trump in those battleground states is pulling about 60% from Republican voters. If he can get his base back to about an 85, 86% level, all those battleground states move into a tie or perhaps a lead for him in some states, and that's got to be his first step. He has to get that Republican base energized, mobilized, and motivated to get them back on his team, in which case we have a race.
Now, Professor, his team's changed, okay? He keeps making changes, brings new leaders in to come in and run the show, and I think Steve's right. You've noticed, I would think, that he's kind of changed his tone, at least in the last couple of weeks, and how he's focusing. But is it too late for that, or are people going to see through that, and will it last? Because he's right. Trump has a huge ego. How long does this last?
Well, part of the problem is that Trump also still has the Twitter feed. And yesterday he went off message rather quickly on the Twitter feed by attacking Scarborough and MSNBC, these sorts of things that serve up a certain amount of interest and attention and take the attention away from his message of the day. The campaign is still dealing with a problematic candidate. And even though he has changed the people around him, he hasn't changed himself. He's still tends to go off sometimes with a stronger line. Some people think his line, say for example on African Americans, what do you have to lose? That was a bit of his own line. That was a bit of his own take, and to some extent, a lot of people said that sounds kind of patronizing. And so there's a way in which even when they craft message, he may take it to another level that doesn't work as well. Who knows, though? I think I never want to say it's too late, because we've even been thinking about October surprises, revelations in the emails, these sorts of things. But there are ways in which certain impressions set in at a point, and Romney suffered from this in the same period in the last election cycle. This is obviously an unusual year. Both candidates have such high negatives, but the time is not exactly on Trump's side.
Yeah, Steve, you said you were at the convention as a delegate for Cruz, but I'm just curious, do you get any sense of the dynamic talking to maybe and what you observed to the Trump people, just the way the man operates? And so much has been written and we've seen, but behind the scenes, I mean, does he sit there? We see these meetings where he's meeting with his advisors that are on the news a lot, and he's sitting there and he's flanked by a bunch of people around this table and he's nodding and listening. But what's the real story? I mean, they tell him stuff, and is he saying, yeah, I'm going to try to do that, and then he just goes off because he's in the moment? Or does he just kind of, yeah, I'll take your advice, but I'm always going to do it my way? What's your sense of what he's really like behind the scenes when they tell him these things? Does he nod and mean, yeah, I'm going to, or is he like, I'll think about it?
Well, I think he is a very successful guy and has done it by going against the grain, by kind of doing it his own way.
Got him this far, right?
And I think most successful people, stick with what got them there. He's in a different arena than real estate development, the rough and tumble of entrepreneurship. It's a different environment, and it's a different environment from a Republican primary to a general election. And people forget that a year or so ago, this guy was not in politics in any real way at all. He has been a quick learn, but he is still learning how this game is different than everything he's done and how he's been successful in other arenas. I think he listens very carefully to what his kids say, what Ivanka, her husband Jared, says. I think he listens carefully to Don Jr. and Eric. But I think it's a pretty small group that really have the ability to get his ear and for him to pay attention to them. Now, I do think that he has a real synergy with Steve Bannon, who's just been brought in to run the campaign.
Wonder, these new people, I mean, but he already knew it. Right.
And then you got Kellyanne Conway, whose main job is managing.
She's everywhere right now.
But she's a Pence person. She was a Cruz person. So I think the fact that he's brought in somebody who wasn't necessarily on his team shows that he is open to listening to new voices. And I think the fact that Pence is his VP, and that now Kellyanne Conway, who's worked for Pence for a long time, is now one of the top advocates in the campaign, I think shows that he is listening and he is learning.
You agree?
I have a hard time seeing a great deal of learning. I see him giving speeches, that's interesting, but real knowledge, actually being able to show that he actually understands some of the things that I haven't seen yet. And Kellyanne Conway, he had her on the Sunday interview shows, and she said things that simply are unbelievable. That Trump does not believe in personal insults, and he never insults anyone. I mean, this is hard to accept. There's a way in which sometimes he forces his advisors to slip into an unreality zone that makes it very hard to take seriously their role or the idea that he is listening. And I think in that sense, I have a harder time seeing that progression. I still think he's going to beat Trump. He wants to win this election on his own terms, and I think that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, I wonder when the debates come about, how many of them do we think there will be?
There are three in
debates.
One vice presidential debate.
And to me, that's going to be interesting, because it's going to be much different for Donald Trump now having debates without having all those other candidates up there with him. Now it's going to be just him and one other individual, Hillary Clinton, and they're going to have to talk a lot more than, on average, what would Trump talk during most of the debates the first time around? Maybe 8 minutes throughout the whole debate, 10 minutes. Now he's going to have to carry the whole thing. And when the professor talks about, does he really know? The bombast will go only so far. He's going to have to back it up. I mean, I'm very curious to see how he does when he debates. Would you agree? I mean, going up against Hillary, you say what you will about her. I mean, she's got some knowledge from her experience in government that's going to serve her well in the debates, I believe. And we'll see if Donald's able to go beyond just some of the headline-making comments and provide some substance with it.
Well, and he's not having to cut through the noise like he did when you had 15 people on the stage.
That's true. He'll get more
You're
focus.
not having to fight for time.
Yeah.
Again, you've got more focus on these two candidates now, and that's not necessarily good for Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's poll numbers have always gone down historically when she is more visible. She's benefited the last several weeks, again, when all the tension has been on Donald Trump. When it gets back on her, people look at her and realize, oh yeah, I remember, I don't like her. She is one of the worst political candidates in the history of American politics. She lost a race 8 years ago to a guy with a strange name who'd only been in the Senate for 2 years, and she just went through an election cycle where a 120-year-old socialist from Vermont took her all the way to the convention. She is not a good candidate, and the best chance she has is, again, if the focus is on Trump rather than on her. As we move ahead, there will be a lot of focus on her, and she may not fare well in that.
Oh, there already is a lot of focus on her. All right, let's take a break on that note. When we come back, we've got some phone calls. Your thoughts as we continue to talk about some of these new developments in the campaign. More right after this. Stay with us.